Hello, everyone. It's your girl, Odie. Welcome to the first episode of Odie on the March, a podcast where I talk about something while trying to get from point A to point B. Walking about town right now. I am headed towards my library. I stopped in town to get some breakfast. Now I'm working my way from one point to the other. This week, I really wanted to touch on a topic that had been ruminating in my mind for a while. There has been much discussion across social media about the whole thing with Love is Blind and how some of the women stood the guys up at the altar. And basically, this whole thing about how conservative men continue to target liberal women, even though their political, social, and what have you beliefs do not align. Like, why are they pretending to not be conservative, say things like I'm a moderate or I'm apolitical, in the hopes of fooling these women into forming lifelong relationships with them? And I made a bit of a connection that some might find unusual or strange, and that is I compared it to Pimp logic. Now, full disclosure, I kind of already recorded part of this the other day, and some of you have even already heard a preview of it. But I have some other things I want to talk about, so I'm going to switch over to that discussion now. If you saw my post, you know that I was a little touchy. I was a little touchy yesterday. I posted mentioning that I had done a bit of research or work writing on a topic concerning a connection I feel between why conservative men insist on pursuing liberal women and pimp logic and the pimp subculture. Now, it may not seem on the surface that these concepts would be remotely connected, these issues would be remotely connected, but I believe that anything that falls under the toxic patriarchal umbrella is connected in some way. So I'm working to help it make sense to you guys the way it made sense to me, because it was something gnawing on me. Like, I do not watch Love is Blind because the concept annoys me. So it's no surprise to me that with each passing season, they have continued to drift further and further to the left, except in terms of the type of men they get on the show. To the point where a bunch of women reportedly stood up their conservative would-be husbands at the altar because they could not move past the fact that these men were trying to gaslight them into tying a knot while knowing that they were fundamentally incompatible, largely due to socio-political beliefs. And a lot of conservative men in the aftermath of this have been crashing out all across social media because they are realizing that women are not being bullshit down the aisle. They are not going to put aside their own concerns regarding their health, their finances, their safety, to get with a man who pretends that he has no real political beliefs, that he's a moderate or any other type of line they will pass off, while knowing they picked Donald Trump to be president and secretly are thrilled at the possibility of all the damage that man can cause, and want women to believe that even though they voted away their human rights, that they have made them less safe, that they should ignore all of that and tie the knot at a time where certain states are working overtime to get rid of no-fault divorce. This is what they want. And they cannot believe that women are refusing to have anything to do with them. That the minute they even breathe moderate, let alone conservative, women are walking away. Of course, because some of us have access to all of our brain cells, there is a question that we ask, because it's a question that I often ask: what about conservative women? Like, you say you want a traditional wife, you want a Christian old-fashioned marriage. There are plenty of women that make it abundantly clear they are happy to stay at home and raise the kids. They are happy to not have a difficult career, They will let you be the man and earn all the dollars while they stay at home and cook and clean and care for the kids because that is their idea of tradition. And yet, rather than deliberately seek out these type of women, the women who you would think are their most obvious match, these men would rather lie, gaslight, gatekeep, D-girl boss, than do what makes sense. And I know it was puzzling. Why in the world would men who claim they want a trad wife go for the non-trad wife, or rather the non-trad woman, many of whom are increasingly saying not only do they not want to be married, they don't want to have kids. Why are you pursuing women who you should logically leave alone? And as I was puzzling, I went to sleep and woke up at 3 a.m. and the answer somehow was late 90s WWE. Yeah, and a character called The Godfather. And if you remember or watched WWE wrestling at all, I'll admit I watched it when I was a kid. There was a character whose entire shtick, no joke, was that he was a pimp. And that he had a bunch of, actually, they called them hoes. Like on actual TV. This was a thing. This was an actual thing. And he would show up with all these scantily clad women, and that would be his thing. Now, you're probably wondering, how the hell do we go from Love is Blind, conservative men getting dumped, to a 1990s wrestling with offensive stereotypes? Well, I'm going to draw this through line. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'll make it make sense, I promise. WWE, say what you will about this company, but for the longest time, they have had their pulse on what working class, young white people, especially men, were thinking about in terms of society, in terms of sexuality, in terms of politics. They had Hulk Hogan and Sergeant Slaughter versus the Sheik, and I forgot the guy's name, but he was like a communist heel or what have you. Then later you had your John Cena as your stand-in for Eminem. You had JBL, I think was his name, as a stand-in for George W. Bush, and actually boost the popularity of one Donald Trump, who was actually a hero in the context of WWE before he ran for president. And he was liked by that crowd. So then, well, not then, but late 90s, they introduced this character. And he was a popular character who was a pimp, who was surrounded by these scantily clad women, and how they were treated and degraded, and you assume that they work for him or whatever. And now, even as a youngster, of course, I was offended for a bunch of reasons, but I was also confused. I knew in my brain it wasn't strictly racism where they had this caricature, because there were other Black wrestlers who didn't have anything nearly that offensive going for them. And I'm sure you can talk about all other kinds of things with Vince McMahon and racism and sexism, but I was low-key puzzled as to not only why this character was introduced, but also why he was so popular. But then it started to make sense when I realized that this character's popularity waxed and waned around the rise of the so-called pickup artists. In this movie Magnolia, starring Tom Cruise, his whole thing, that movie came out around the same time that this character, the Godfather in WWE, was at his zenith for popularity and relevance. That character's whole thing, Tom Cruise, I mean, was convincing men that they had to use certain ways to charm women, to get women to do what they wanted sexually, to hypnotize them. And it was a whole thing. Of course, he was a fraud. But the point was, this type of thinking and this type of subculture was on the rise. A little while after that, they had an actual, I think, book come out by this guy. I think his name was Neil Strauss, called The Game, about the whole in the world of pickup artists. And then they had that stupid VH1 show about the pickup artists where these guys got on there and tried to pick up women. And That's where the whole thing with negging came from, where you go out of your way to make a woman feel like crap, and then she's supposed to be more attracted to you. And from there, you got your incel culture, your red pills, and your Andrew Tate, an actual human trafficker who was pardoned by none other than WWE's own Donald Trump, a man who is on record for being successfully sued for SA. See, I told you I'd find a way. But if you're still wondering, you're still not getting where the connection is, I'm going to make it make sense. There is a subsection of men who are not merely angry that they no longer have the easy access to women that they feel entitled to as far as sexually, but also financially. They cannot control women. And what does a pimp do? He controls women. He gaslights them, he abuses them, he manipulates them into serving his needs sexually and financially, to the point where he's able to also convince those women to go out and satisfy other men sexually. And the understanding when those men pay is not merely that they are paying the woman, they're paying the man for access to that woman. So again, you have a situation where men are admiring and exchanging goods, which they don't see women as people, but as goods, with other men. They are using their access and control over women to impress other men, which is why so many of these men admire an Andrew Tate. They don't care that what he does is gross, harmful, and disgusting. They wish they could do it too. They want to be like him. They want to be like Donald Trump, which is why so many voted for it, because at the end of the day, these people align with their thinking. So when you have conservative men who want to go after liberal women, it's not merely because of sex. They appreciate that these women offer it more freely, but it's about control. They want to be able to control a woman. And again, you probably think, well, shouldn't they go after conservative women who are allowed enough to be controlled? For these type of men, the whole point of power and control is that they take it. They want to take power from these women in their lives. They want to control them. They want those women to surrender and be under their thumb. They don't want a situation where the woman volunteers, because not only does she believe in similar things, she will hold him to those conservative values and standards. She will expect him to go out and earn all of the money and provide for and protect their family. She will take that oath to God seriously and hold him to it. A liberal woman who is more progressive, a lot of progressive women have left the church, and if they ever walk through the door, whereas conservative men are flocking to the church. Again, you might be confused. If more men are going to church than ever, then isn't that like the opposite of pimp culture? How many churches are headed by men who use them to enrich themselves, who are narcissists and egotistical, and get off on the idea that they have so many people under their control who they can exploit financially, and in some cases, because scandals involving church leaders doing what they shouldn't with other people, sexually. So again, you have men who claim to be about certain values, who that is merely a facade. And what they really want at the end of the day is power and control over someone they view as beneath them. And because women of this generation, especially coming up, do not view themselves as less, to the point where they're no longer even seeking men. A lot of women have said they are child-free and they don't want to get married. And if they do want to get married, it's only ever going to be to a progressive man, which a conservative is not. So they go to church in order to have their beliefs affirmed, but they're not going to church to find women because they do not want to be held accountable. They want power. They want to break a woman and rule over her with the same kind of an iron fist you would expect from a pimp. So you have generations, because the timeline I just drew for you, It goes back beyond that. The Godfather in wrestling was a throwback to 70s black exploitation, where one of the main heroes of that era was a pimp who had a council of pimps. And they were talking about overcoming the man and controlling their merchandise. Because, of course, this is 70s, and women at the time were not expected to have an equal seat at the table. So you're talking about generations of people brought up with this idea at the back of their head, this fantasy, this entitlement to women, and the belief that they should be able to have unfettered access to women like their merchandise or cattle, to do with whatever they want, and not merely control their bodies, but also control their finances. And me, I am seeing a connection to where guys are saying, because these type of men will speak out of both sides of their mouth, they want a traditional relationship, but they also want a woman to pay 50-50. A man who says he is a conservative, wants traditional values, but also wants a woman to pay 50-50 is leaning into pimp culture, and I will tell you why. Because traditionally, a man is the head of household who goes out, works, supports a family. Of course, in this economy, you're lucky if you're thrupled up and you can afford a house, rent, or whatever you need, food, if everything's expensive. So you would say logically, oh, well, maybe he's liberal enough as a conservative man to respect a woman's right to work outside the home. But that is where you'd be wrong, because a conservative woman would have no intention of doing that. Now, I have seen this in my own life. A family member grew up a housewife. She did work occasionally, but mostly she was a housewife and she was content. And her husband worked, and that was what they agreed on, because they didn't have the money for childcare, and they also were concerned about what would happen to their children when they were with other people. So they decided to do that. And for the time period, it worked for them. So I have direct experience seeing that. And a lot of conservative women would want that. Now, I'm not talking about whether you agree with these women or disagree. The point is, their expectations mirror what it means to be a traditional conservative American household. Add Christian on top of that. Demanding a woman go out and work a full-time job where she gives you half, if not all, of her money, is also responsible for cooking, cleaning, and caring for you, because these men don't do anything to help, because that's not traditional. When you put a woman in a position where you try to rule over her while also taking from her, while also restricting her because you want power over her, you feel you're entitled to power over her, her body, her life, her finances, that is pimp logic. And pimp logic, in various forms, I believe, was made popular to multiple generations of men in one form or another. You could also go to rap music. 50 Cent, I think Snoop Dogg, they had that P.I.M.P. song. Various points in hip hop music, hip hop culture, highly misogynistic towards women. And these things became popular culture. So when you have certain things, whether it's The Godfather, whether it's hip hop, these things become mainstream culture. You have a lot of young men listening to them, and you have their sons listening to them, and now their grandsons listening to these things. As they become popular, your red pill, your agitate, you have generations of men brought up to think a certain way and be influenced by this and move in that direction. And because they were taught or influenced to think this behavior, this thinking is acceptable and normal and women should do this, now they are confused. They probably are lonely because they believe that they were taught that I am alpha, I am a pimp, I am this, that, and the other. God has said that the man should rule over the woman. Whatever their logic is, they believe that they deserve a woman, the best woman, the hottest woman, that they should fall at their feet, that there's cheat codes to women because, we've gone from being furniture to being some sort of program that can be hacked like a freaking PlayStation. So the ultimate level of the misogyny is, even though women, whether you're conservative or liberal, know that none of this makes sense, they will not listen because they have been brought up for generations to think that women are not people. Our voices, our protest, our thinking does not matter. What only matters is the opinion of other men, whether that's in terms of impressing these men or learning from these men. So when these men say things that we know does not make sense, that has decreasing returns, our protests, our opinions don't matter. They just figure, well, if I say the right words, if I get the right level of influence, if I sunk cost fallacy her ass, it'll all work out in my favor. And that's why those men got left at the altar on Love is Blind. They thought they could sunk cost fallacy those women into ignoring their ears and eyes, as so many other generations of women have, and tying themselves to them in matrimony. And the reason you have so many conservative men or so many men who think like that, the Andrew Tater Tots or what have you, freaking out, claiming how lonely they are, is because they genuinely believe that they should have, no matter what, financial and physical control over women. This is not something to be challenged or disagree with. It's what they were brought up to believe practically. They were practically raised in this thinking. If not, they found their way to it and something clicked in this place for them, because I believe that subconsciously men have been exposed to this, and at some point or another, if they don't have the mental capacity to appreciate what nonsense it is, they are vulnerable to fall for it. And they fell for it. So half the reason they're crashing out is because, short of a Handmaid's Tale reset of America, and even then you have to hope that it's successful to the degree that you can take that kind of control and nobody will fight. They're not going to get that outcome. At some point, somebody is going to have to, while probably having a penis, because as I said, we could say it a million times, a million different ways, and make every kind of sense as women, and it won't be heard. But they will have to be the ones to tear down the patriarchal machine. Patriarchal, different branches, some more crude than others, but often all linked to a very toxic, archaic, and harmful approach to humanity and relationships. But I do have a silver lining in that those women said no, that we're seeing so many women say no and choose themselves in their own peace and stepping away from toxic thinking and not buying the bullshit. They're not allowing these men to get away with lying to them. They're treating it like the red flag that it is, and they're refusing to build a life with them. And yes, now you have these men crashing out all over social media because they don't want to change, because they don't feel they have to. They feel, I am right and I'm entitled. This is what I was brought up to believe. This is what this man says. And look at all the women he's surrounded with. Never mind if he paid them to be there, or if he kidnapped them or tricked them, he has them. And I want that. And I shouldn't have to change, is their thinking. But as pussy becomes scarce, to the point where they may have to look at it in a museum because they're so far away from it, maybe at some point a light bulb will go off and they will realize that this is not what they want if they want to build a life. Because love is not violence. Love is not control. Love is not deceit. Love is mutual respect, communication, trust, equality. You are looking for a partner, not something to own, someone to be beside. You walk beside them, they're not behind you. Hopefully you understand my thoughts and why I was feeling a bit spicy when I did, because this topic and looking into it, I got to do still more research, not looking forward to that for this. But yeah, feel free to reach out and let me know what you feel. Hello, welcome back. Yeah, I'm coming up on the library now. And I hope that something that I've shared today has helped you, made you laugh, made you smile, made you think. I'm Odie March, and this has been my podcast, Odie on the March, and I hope to see you next time. You take care.